Let's
50
see.
cents Ferraris.
They're saying MTV Cribs was fake, and they got evidence. So let's see.
Were rented. Robbie Williams' castle home, it belonged to someone else.
What?
MTV Cribs wasn't exactly legit.
And we said that that was my house.
Oh, that wasn't your house?
No, it's all lies.
And nothing
Really?
shows this better than the episode with Ja Rule. He flexed his 5-bedroom mansion on Star Island in Miami, where he talked about living beside other famous celebrities. The house was so familiar that Ja Rule named each area, calling his courtyard the Open Paradise, which was patrolled by his guard dog Cookie. It was shown in the intro that the property was a rental, but this was assumed to be on a long-term basis, given he knew almost everything about the mansion. However, as it turns out, Ja Rule's house on Cribs was actually a 4-day rental, which was exposed in the most embarrassing way, by lawsuit. Ja Rule paid $46,000 for the 4-day lease, promising the mansion's own.
Dang, 46 bands? That's a finesse. How many? 46 divided by 4 is what? You paying just about 10K a day. A little bit more than that. That's crazy.
It'd be used as a private home for 8 adults with no video shoots and no loud parties. Well, Ja Rule broke all 3 conditions,
video
shooting his
shoot.
MTV episode whilst having a party with over 600 people. In the process, holes were punched in the walls, furniture and doors were damaged, the driveway somehow cracked, while condoms and syringes were left throughout the house.
Yeah, that's horrible.
As a result, Ja Rule and MTV were sued for $1 million, but at least it looked like a house that Ja Rule would live in, as the Yin Yang twins' crib was laughably out of character.
Are you serious?
The Atlanta gangster rapping duo opened the door revealing the most suburban house, filled with
Okay, I remember seeing this, but I never thought much of it. But now that you pointed out, it does look a little odd that they be living in something like this.
fish tanks, sailing boats, and
Sailing boats and stuff, yeah.
We waving like the city. We decorated this ourselves now.
That mansion was definitely decorated by some old
Yeah.
white people,
Yeah, I
not
agree.
the Yin Yang twins.
This is clearly just a random old white guy's house that likes to fish and likes boats.
That even argued over where they bought appliances and had to improvise names for each of the fish. You can tell the Yin Yang twins have never been in that house. It seemed they at least owned the vehicles at the end, as the
they own
cars
the
displayed
vehicles,
by
yeah.
Bow Wow were rented for the show. He was just 18 years old during his first Cribs appearance, but despite having starred in some high-profile movies, it seemed unrealistic that he could afford a 6-bedroom mansion and a fleet of luxury cars.
Yeah.
With his name airbrushed above his bed, it seemed as though Bow Wow at least owned the house, although the luxury vehicles were a little more suspicious, because 2 years later he'd go on the show again, during which a viewer made an observation. We had MTV Cribs running in the background and watched 21-year-old Bow Wow show off his bachelor pad in Miami, along with his pimped out Bentley, Lamborghini, and Cadillac Escalade. But then we noticed the word Prestige at the bottom of all 3 cars.
Oh,
and
that's
decided to Google
Prestige is
Rental
a
Cars Miami,
luxury
and
auto
what do you know,
rental.
there it was.
Yeah, I know about them.
Prestige was the name of the company that Bow Wow rented the cars from, which was likely encouraged by the show, as Birdman also used the service during his appearance.
I agree.
Regardless, people clowned on Bow Wow, stating, "Ha ha ha, I wonder if he rented the condo too," which by looking at his life was also highly likely. For example, he'd post his Ferrari to his Instagram, writing, "Take the drop top to the night spot. Keep the California in California. We went hard tonight, Grammy weekend."
90% of all the cars that you see rappers drive, they're normally rented. There's rental businesses in every major city. You know, so social media ain't real.
Which was then reposted by a car rental company who accidentally exposed our good friend Bow Wow pulling up to the Grammys with our Ferrari California.
It ain't
1 year
accident,
later,
no, that was
he
on
was
purpose.
exposed for flexing a rented Hollywood mansion, but the worst example was in 2017 when he'd post this to his Instagram. He showed the private jet he was taking to his concert, yet the very same day this Snapchat went viral. So this guy Lil Bow Wow is on my flight to NY, but but on Instagram he posted a picture of a private jet caption traveling to NY today, shaking my head.
Yes.
Turns out Bow Wow's picture of his private jet had been taken from a limo company's website, prompting people to dig even deeper, discovering he'd done this on more than one occasion. It seems his MTV Cribs episode led to years and years of faking luxury.
Yo, that's
but
crazy.
as mentioned in Bow Wow's expose, 50 Cent had
That's
done
crazy.
a similar thing. 50 Cent's episode was the definition of excess. He showed his 19-bedroom, 35-bathroom
bedroom was
mansion,
crazy.
which included a squash court, movie theater, recording studio, and its very own nightclub. Equally impressive was his car collection, which included
nice
4 different
Pontiac.
rare collectible Ferraris, leading him to state,
I know you ain't see these before when you was watching Cribs because everybody ain't got these.
yet it seems 50 Cent didn't have them either. Each Ferrari had little numbers on their windshields, leading to a forum post reading, if you notice the small white numbers in the top left-hand corner of the windshields on the F50 and Enzo, those are the numbers of the cars that were in the Hartford Concorso parade, which was confirmed when the user posted these photos.
Oh, okay.
Another forum member added, it's pretty obvious that they aren't his, because it's a known fact that there's only one yellow Enzo in CT, which was owned by a pretty
Really?
well-known hedge fund manager. Well, someone else
Yeah, it's normally hedge fund managers that got the dough like that, bro.
then officially confirmed. The Ferraris are unfortunately not 50 cents. He invited my friend over to his house for this, and my friend let him use his cars for the episode, and they were filming some music videos that day as well. The Enzo
Which that is very, like, that's a normal thing in the industry. Like the, I think it was Scott Scorcher's Bugatti that was used in, I think it was Lil Wayne's video or whoever's video where they used the Bugatti in the background, that was his. And that was like something that I always knew.
F50 and 599 all belong to one owner.
Yeah,
when
yeah.
50 Cent later filed for bankruptcy, he'd admit the cars were rented. He'd instead pay off debts by selling his mansion, therefore
He
joining
owned the
the
house,
likes of JoJo, who admitted to doing MTV Cribs while she was actually homeless. JoJo showed MTV
crazy.
through her Cape Cod vacation home, where she supposedly loved spending her summers. It was
at that
therefore a little
fridge.
weird that she'd invite her extended family, but she'd reveal the reason for this exactly.
She was staying
10
at
years
her,
later.
family
JoJo
house.
was asked about the episode in a Huffington Post interview, to which she'd respond it was so ridiculous. The thing is, we didn't have a home at that point. My mum and I were living out of suitcases and were mostly in hotels. So that was actually my uncle's house on the Cape. That wasn't my house, that wasn't my stuff. I should have bought hard and been like, welcome to my crib, look at how luxurious it is, and I should have rented out a place. But no, I just used my uncle's crib. JoJo further clarified.
Okay.
So we went to the Cape, which I've like never been to the Cape. I like never go to the Cape. And we said that that was my house.
Oh, that wasn't your house?
No, that was not my house. We brought in some like items that I had. It's all lies.
Should also answer
Wow.
the question,
Why even bother doing the episode then?
For the exposure.
Yeah, exposure.
but no
Promotion.
episode was faker than the one by Robbie Williams. He showed MTV his massive British castle, talking about the spots where he'd been snapped by paparazzi. He then shows his group of friends before making a joke,
I don't really know these people, but what I do is actually phone Rent-A-Friend.
but apparently he'd also phoned Rent a Castle. You see, the building was so big that people recognized it as the famous St. Catherine's Court, which was owned by someone else completely, Jane Seymour. She had no idea that Robbie ever went there, or that he'd hired a fake butler to help out with the shoot.
What do you mean?
It wouldn't be until 17 years later that Robbie finally admitted, we didn't let Jane know that I was gonna pretend it was my house. And because I was like 23 and full of spunk, I didn't even consider other people's thoughts or feelings. So I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize to Jane Seymour, but it might not have even
Wow.
been Robbie Williams' fault. Because Redman explained in a DJ Vlad interview
Okay, I remember Redman's crib, and I was like, bro, what in the fuck is going on? Because, like, all of the other cribs looked really big, and then his was like a regular apartment. And I'm like, bro, what the hell going on?
MTV tried to
He
get him
actually
to rent
used
a
his
house
crib.
for Cribs.
They wanted me to rent a house so I can open the big double doors and shit like, yo, look at my shit, you know.
With MTV trying to choose the home themselves.
The first thing they said was, all right, we got a couple of houses picked out for you. And I was like, oh, okay.
Well, Redman simply refused.
And I said, you know what? No, I don't want to rent a house. I want y'all to come to my house.
Accidentally making the show's most relatable episode.
Yeah, it was very
he brought
relatable.
MTV cribs to
Yeah.
his 2-bedroom apartment, where he ironed his shirts on the floor and
I
flexed his
remember that.
frozen fish fillets. Redman's
Yeah.
recording studio was just a messy bedroom, whilst the rest of his house was in such disarray, you could barely notice his cousin sleeping on the ground.
I did
he
notice
concludes
his cousin
the
on the
episode
ground.
stating, "Next time y'all need to find me, just rub these 2 wires for the doorbell."
Don't worry about the screen too. You know, it's still good.
The realest episode of MTV Cribs.
Wow.
Redman didn't fake it like other
I didn't know that everybody else was faking. Okay, now we saying Pimp My Ride was
Strength
fake
training,
too.
now at a new level. Gym Monster 2 is an all-in-one design.
You're at a house. It's not my house. It's a staged house.
And the contestants' houses weren't the only thing Pimp My Ride lied about. The reactions were staged and retaken multiple times. Certain upgrades were taken off as soon as the cameras cut.
It's for a boat. He goes, it's a GPS for waterways. It will not work in your car.
Disappointingly, even Exhibit himself had no real interest in cars.
Soccer moms coming up to me, telling me about their husband and their car that he had since the 60s. And I was like, stop talking to me about this. I know as much as you do.
When asked if the show was fake, a former contestant replied with a single word correct, which isn't surprising as the show even lied about who the contestants were. For example, in season 2, episode 10, Brooke was introduced as a 22-year-old film lover working hard to go to grad school, which had been fabricated by the producers as she was actually a 25-year-old cocktail waitress planning to move back to New York. The reason for this, as explained by Jake from season 3, was because Pimp My Ride only picked people in their early 20s.
There was a strict age limit of 22 years old.
Confirming that the show was lying about contestants' details before filming had even started. In the first 30 seconds of each episode, Exhibit emphasizes that each contestant doesn't know they're about to get picked.
He has no idea. I'm about to pimp his
Of course,
Yet this was strange as the contestant always answered the door, always had a microphone on them, and even had their windows blacked out as if they didn't want cameras seeing inside. Well, it turns out Brooke, the supposed 22-year-old film lover, had been pre-selected by a friend to appear on the show, and as a result she'd state, when Exhibit showed up at my house to tell me I'd been chosen, not a surprise. What was a surprise was when the producers made me react and then react again to Exhibit showing up, finally coercing me into doing a cartwheel, and she wasn't the only contestant who'd had this experience.
That's so awkward.
How to say it and
Why
what
she
to
got a
say
snake in
and
the
everything like
background?
that.
The show didn't have an actual script, but they did steer the dialogue in a direction that they wanted. If I said something they liked, they would have me repeat it over and over on camera. This had been commented by Seth, who appeared in season 5, who was also well aware that Exhibit was coming to his house, stating, "They told me I was in the running for my own episode, but it was between me and 2 other people. When I was sitting in the house waiting for a knock at the door, they said that it was either going to be Exhibit or a producer telling me I didn't win. Thinking back on it, that was all bullshit, but it did make the surprise genuine, which was the same experience as Erin from season 4, episode 2.
She was one of 3 contestants. One of them would be chosen. Someone came and knocked at the door.
That car is mad ugly.
Each contestant was at least somewhat aware that they'd be getting a knock on the door because, well, the homes they were in were actually owned by Pimp My Ride. A Huffington Post article clarified these houses were oftentimes not the contestants' homes. Instead, each dwelling had been rented by MTV. For example, when Jake from season 3 was asked, did the film crew show up and stage the whole surprise as part of the episode, he'd respond by stating it wasn't my house. It was a place owned by one of the crew members. Similarly, Seth from season 5 stated, the house was rented from Craigslist because I lived in an apartment and they need a house with a big open driveway for filming, which is certainly reasonable, although sometimes the house was part of the person's story. In season 2, for example, Eric's car had supposedly been beat up in the rough streets of Compton.
In Compton, ain't no street lights in Compton.
However, judging from a quick look at Google Maps, it seems the episode was filmed in a much nicer neighborhood. So if Eric's story was inconsistent and Brooke's story from earlier was downright fabricated, then who else's stories were exaggerated for the sake of the show?
Probably
well,
a lot.
it seems pretty much all of them.
Wow.
In season 3,
All
Jake's
of them.
Buick had been bought from his grandma who smoked, and as a result, the show threw an extra few dozen cigarette butts in the car to make her just look like a totally disgusting person.
That is
On top of
pretty
this, the show
disgusting.
interviewed Jake's girlfriend toward the start of the episode.
I remember
yet
this
MTV
episode.
apparently questioned me having a girlfriend and suggested I dump her because it was better for my desperate dude with a shit car image. A producer later responded by stating, why would we want a kid to break up with his girlfriend? How would that have helped the show? So while Jake's claim about his girlfriend was somewhat questionable, questionable, the cigarette story was confirmed by Seth, who had a similar experience. I know I'm fat, but they went the extra mile to make me look extra fat by telling the world that I kept candy all over my seat and floor just in case I got hungry. However,
wild.
it seems the fakest story was Justin's in season 6. His front bumper had supposedly fallen off in a car crash.
Here is the result of a 3-car pileup right here.
Although according to a 2010 tweet, my friend Justin was on Pimp My Ride. On TV, he said his RAV4 was involved in a 3-car crash. No, it wasn't. Dude beat his car up with a bat. The same user then clarified, what he told me was that MTV suggested to him that he and his friend should do more damage to the car, which was confirmed by Justin himself, who'd add, yes, they removed my front bumper, used aircraft remover, and enhanced the dent on the side of my car. Whilst introducing the episode, Justin stated,
one of my crazy ex-girlfriends actually threw nail polish on my hood.
Although when he was asked, why are all your ex-girlfriends so angry, Justin revealed it was just something I made up, while Erin from season 4 was also encouraged to make her car look bad.
They asked to leave trash in the car. We went to In-N-Out, and so they told me to leave it in the cup holder, so I did.
It seems the only real part of the show's intro was Exhibit's improvised dialogue.
Because it wasn't scripted. I could say whatever I want to say.
And when Exhibit drove the car to the shop.
Exhibit did actually take the cars and drive them away, with the exception of a few that were too broken down, and then they made it look like he did.
Although this segment created even more problems. Most people believe that PMR takes the car and gives it back in like a week or something. That's what I thought was going to happen too. But in actuality, they took my car for roughly 7 months, being a massive inconvenience for some of the show's contestants.
And they make it look like they're moving really, really fast, but in reality, they weren't.
When asked for the 5 months they had your car, did they supply you with a replacement car? Justin from season 6 replied, no, they gave me $2,000 to rent a car. But I was 19 at the time. I rented a car for a month and it cost me $1,000, forcing Justin to find his own transport for the remaining 4 months. Seth from season 5 had a similar experience, being forced to go to a really small shady company off the freeway by LAX because they were the only ones willing to rent to me because of my age. It sucked having that rental car because they wouldn't take payments over the phone, so once a month I had to drive all the way from West Covina to LAX just for them to swipe my card. Although the rental situation was better for other contestants.
They had my car for about 6 months, and that time I had the rental car for 6 months as well.
With Jake from season 3 adding, they gave me a really nice Mitsubishi Lancer drive for the time they had the Buick. In the meantime, the crew began to plan how the rides were going to be pimped, although according to a former production staffer, this was also somewhat staged. The scenes with the WCC crew took a long time to shoot. They often had to be fed line by line. Some of those guys never really got used to being on TV. Some of the lines in the shot probably seem rehearsed because producers would come up with them and feed them to the WCC guys, although excluding this, the mechanics were fairly innocent. The segment where they'd pimp the car was almost impossible to fake.
They really did put shit in the vehicles and change everything out.
But when contestants were shown what their new car looked like, Pimp My Ride employed even more staging. Finally came the day for the big reveal. They filmed my reaction to the car at least 10 times before I even seen it. And when I did, holy hell, poor Betsy looked like Barbie's dream car from hell. It was pimped to the nines and hideous. This had been written by Brooke, who gave a much different reaction during her episode.
Yeah, she's probably pissed.
Exactly the color I want.
While every other contestant also filmed the reveal multiple different times.
We had to take a lot of takes over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Justin stated they had to keep retaking my reaction. Seth stated I even had to do the reveal of the car like 3 times. However, Jake's reaction anecdote was the strangest of them all. His first real reaction to the car was just quiet amazement where he said this is good. They immediately yelled redo and then things got a bit weirder. I remember this very clearly. Big Dane, very big dude, he like puts his arm around my shoulder, kind of walks me around the shop for like 10 minutes and he's like, listen, we put a lot of work into this. We expect you to be a little more enthusiastic, although it would have been hard to conjure enthusiasm for a car that barely worked.
What is that?
As Jake would later write, the problem with the show is they don't fix any of the mechanical issues. My car was a piece of shit. What they did was make my piece of shit sound exceptionally awesome, which is great, just not great enough to drive on roads. The HuffPost article expanded on this by stating, the car needed a muffler, and so a fake exhaust pipe was installed to make it seem as if that's what the car was supposed to sound like, even though it was just a lack of a muffler, while Exhibit brought up a much more dangerous incident.
There was an instance where one of the cars wasn't fixed correctly, and long story short, this kid kid was driving this vehicle that was supposed to be like damn near brand new, and the steering wheel came off when he was driving it.
It's therefore no surprise that the production staff has said, I can say that the cars often weren't fully ready when we shot the reveal. Some had to stay in the shop another week or so to get finished before the kids got them back, especially if they had mechanical issues, and it was Seth and his candy bars who seemed to fit this category. Pimp My Ride doubled down on his supposedly crappy diet by installing a cotton candy machine in the boot of the car, which didn't even work as the cotton candy machine didn't have a protective hood that fit. So if I tried turning it on, it would get candy strands everywhere. Very messy, so I never used it again after the shoot. Seth also never used the LED lights installed in the seats as they would get really hot if left on, while he also had to remove the gull-wing doors because the pistons used to lift them kept them from putting seatbelts in the back, which was highly dangerous. To add a cherry on top of the cake, he had to fork out a further $1,700 for a brand new engine, then adding, after that I drove it for a month before someone hit me and totaled it. However, the end to Justin's RAV4 was even more brutal. After 5 years of taking his pimped out ride to car shows, Justin's RAV4 caught on fire whilst driving as a result of faulty wires. It was later confirmed that this had nothing to do with the show, and at least Justin's car was the same one he first sent in, as when Tavrish uploaded a video titled I bought an abandoned Pimp My Ride minivan, he'd make a shocking discovery. The show originally introduced the minivan as a 1998 Plymouth Grand Voyager, however Tavrish discovered the car was now a 1999 Dodge Caravan, showing that after they wrecked the original minivan, the show sneakily pimped a completely different car. As a result, Exhibit has been the brunt of most of the show's backlash.
I was the face of the show, you know what I'm saying? So people associate me with what happened to the car.
Which feels pretty unfair given every contestant has said he's an awesome guy.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's his fault. He's just a
host.
host.
The following reason.
I actually did Pimp My Ride because I thought they was gonna play my music videos.
However, it instead seemed to have the opposite effect.
The show was taking away my credibility of what I'd already done. It was taking so much time. I wasn't able to tour. I wasn't able to record albums.
Oh, damn, I definitely didn't know.
I was there filming.
Which is even more depressing given he was barely paid for it.
But at that particular time, you wasn't really happy with the pay though. Nah.
And as a result, it's no surprise that Pimp My Ride is unlikely to make a comeback.
When are we gonna get a Pimp My Ride?
No, there'll be no more Pimp My Ride.
You know what? I never seen Exhibit get older until just now. So that was kind of weird to see him be so old.